Check 1 2 check. Check 1 2 check. And greetings everyone, welcome to tonight's live stream. Sorry about that, we had a little audio problem there. And let me just do a quick audio check to see if everything is all right with the stream. And greetings everyone, welcome to tonight's live stream. Sorry about that, we had a little audio problem there. Okay, so there's no echo. All right. Well, right, I'd like to thank everybody for coming to tonight's live stream. I know it's kind of short notice, but the way things are moving right now in Afghanistan, I was wading through all the news items. I was watching a lot of the news on television about what's going on in Afghanistan. I saw President Biden's speech about what was going on, pretty much not taking the blame for what's going on in Afghanistan. He's not taking the blame for anything. He's pretty much saying it's everybody else's fault. It's Trump's fault. It's the Afghan army's fault because they don't want to fight for their country. It's the president of Afghan's fault. It's his fault as well. So it's everybody else's fault. It's not his. And he was trying to make himself look like the good guy. But the truth is that the troops, his military leaders advised him not to pull out the way he wanted to pull out, and he didn't care. He pulled out U.S. troops the way he wanted to do it. His military guys said, no, you don't do it this way or else there's going to be chaos, and lo and behold, there's chaos. He didn't care. He did it anyways, and now there's calls for President Biden to resign. A lot of people are saying that he should resign for what he did. This is strictly, what's going on in Afghanistan right now is strictly his fault. And the reason why the Afghan troops are not fighting, they've pretty much given up their weapons and their posts to the Taliban. They've pretty much given up because the U.S. The U.S. pretty much told the Taliban army and the president that we're not supporting you anymore. You're on your own. We're pulling out. We're going home, and you're not going to receive any more support. And that's why they've given up. They have no more air support from the United States. They have no more ground troops from the United States. There's no more support from the United States and the NATO allies. And they just gave up. They knew the Taliban would be sweeping in. And they just gave up everything. Gave up their weapons, gave up their military posts, everything. Because of Joe Biden and what he did. It's pretty much Joe Biden's fault. No matter how many people he tries to blame, the blame is strictly on him. And now there's calls for Biden to resign. Many people, including the last president, Donald Trump, is calling for the resignation of Joe Biden. And also, the NATO allies are upset with all of this. They wanted to stay in Afghanistan for their own security interests. Not just for the interests of the United States, but their own security interests. And now they're all upset with Joe Biden, and they've strictly put it on Joe Biden's shoulders. This what's going on. It's pretty much Joe Biden's fault. The Prime Minister of Britain, Boris Johnson, said that it's pretty much Joe Biden's fault. Germany is upset with Joe Biden. So the NATO allies have been rattled by all of this. Not to mention that this puts the security of the United States more at risk, because now the allies around the world, U.S. allies around the world, are wondering, well, can we trust the United States any longer as a faithful ally because of what they just did in Afghanistan? 20 years, ladies and gentlemen, 20 years, and they estimated about $2 trillion, and it was all for naught. The Taliban has taken over the country in 9 days. It was all for naught, ladies and gentlemen. 20 years and $2 trillion, and this is what we got for it. Now we are more vulnerable than ever. That the United States is at risk more now around the world. And now jihadists apparently are now flocking to Afghanistan and to the Taliban, and this is defeat that the United States just experienced. The jihadis are going to use this propaganda to bring in more recruits around the world, and now they've pretty much declared, because they're in Kabul now, they pretty much declared it an Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. Pretty much. I think that's the way they put it. And so they've pretty much taken over the country. They've defeated the United States, and now we're going to have, once again, another terrorist base in that region. And on top of that, ladies and gentlemen, Iran is now being friendly to the Taliban. And they've pretty much taken in some of the Taliban after the United States went in there in 2001 and housed them and fed them and trained them. And so we're seeing Afghanistan getting into this. We're also seeing China. We're seeing Russia fill in the vacuum that the United States is leaving. And China's saying, you see, the United States is not a reliable partner. Come with us. Russia's saying the same thing. We see Iran in there. I want to read you this article by Hamed Mohammadi, and this was written about a month ago, and the title is Why Iran is Actively Backing the Taliban for the First Time. Now, I think this is significant when it comes to Bible prophecy. It says here, the Iran clerical Shiite regime has seemingly overturned its long-held hostility to the Taliban and may be readying itself to welcome the enemies of America as Kabul's new masters. So they're all for this. And it says here, there can be no doubt the situation in Afghanistan is critical. As U.S. and allied troops depart, the Taliban are exploiting the Kabul government's weakness to capture districts and towns, especially in the north. It says here that there have been reports of Afghan troops simply handing over their trucks to the Taliban, by some accounts, as many as 700 trucks in recent weeks, in addition to armored vehicles and artillery equipment. All these will aid the Taliban in their war effort. So they just pretty much handed over everything because they found out that the U.S. isn't going to support them anymore. They're not going to support them in this fight to keep the Taliban at bay. Then it says, skip on here, it says here, Hosseini, a legislator, has accused the Iranian Revolutionary Guards and Pakistan and ISI intelligence agency of helping the Taliban, saying arms have been smuggled in from Iran. So here is Iran smuggling in arms to help the Taliban take over Afghanistan and kick the United States out. It says here, in the past 20 to 30 years, Afghanistan has, like Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, entered the Iranian regime's resistance map of regions where it sought to extend its ideological sway at the West's expense. The Revolutionary Guards have been biding their time ahead of a Western withdrawal. So here we have the Iranians smuggling in arms and now have included Afghanistan as the regime's resistance map of regions to resist the West. And of course, they hate America, death to Israel. So now they're making friends with the Taliban. And let me just finish this. It says, aware of the West's strategic and security interests in Afghanistan and its rivalries with China and Russia, the Guards, that's the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, want the country turned into another quagmire for the United States, like Iraq. In fact, backing the Taliban and Al-Qaeda could help the Iranian regime send its own militias into a lawless country, compensating for its weakened position in Syria and Iraq. And then the last page of this, it says the Islamic Republic is not only inclined to see the Taliban take Kabul, but already busy whitewashing the terrorists at home, with one conservative daily in Tehran writing, the Taliban today are not the Taliban who used to cut off heads. And then it says, but after the United States toppled the Taliban in 2001, the Iranian supreme leader not only sheltered them, but is now veering closer ties with them. So they want closer ties with each other. Then it says here, according to the U.S. State Department documents, many Taliban and Al-Qaeda leaders have been living in Iran in recent years. And then it lists cities in Iran, and then it says these cities are turning into training bases for Shia militiamen fighting in Syria under the Qud army, the Revolutionary Guard strike force in the Middle East. Dozens have returned to Iran as war winds down in Syria, ready to fight in Afghanistan instead, if not inside Iran. the Revolutionary Guards would have no qualms about using them to crush domestic protests in Iran. And then it says here that one of the legislatures in Iran says one of the reasons that the Taliban is one of the region's essential movements with whom we have shared enemies, talking about the United States. And then it says that this resistance in Afghanistan is an Islamic awakening influenced by the ideas of Iran's late revolutionary leader, Ruhollah Khomeini. The fact is, the regime and the Revolutionary Guards have extended their tentacles and their money in both the Afghan government and the Taliban. So here we see Iran is actively wooing the Taliban, the Afghan people, the Afghan government. They got money, they got weapons in there, and they want closer ties with Afghanistan because they're seeing that that is a potential terrorist base. Just like the terrorist base they set up before with Al-Qaeda, they see a potential terrorist base. They can expand their power into Afghanistan and grow their power. And, of course, try and take over the Middle East, which is what they want. And, of course, have death to Israel and death to America. So here we see the Iranian regime spreading its tentacles out and gaining more and more power. Now, when it comes to Bible prophecy, we've been saying for years now, and it's all documented in our booklets and in our videos, we've been saying to watch Iran. We've been saying watch that part of the Middle East of old Persia, which consists of Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iran. And where did this war on terrorism start? It started in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Al-Qaeda network was also in Pakistan. And it started in that region, and it fulfilled the prophecy of Daniel, the 11th chapter, verse 44, as it says here. Tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Now, I put the link in the chat room, Middle Eastern Prophecy, if anybody wants to take a look at it. And we show you that the King of the North is the President of the United States. We show you in that booklet that Daniel 2 and Daniel 11 go together like hand in glove. They go together like hand in glove. And we show you that down at when Nebuchadnezzar saw the image in the plain in Daniel 2, the head of gold, the arms of silver, the torso of brass, and the legs of iron, we get down to the feet and toes, part potter's clay and part iron. And of course, this is in the context of nations. We show you that that is NATO. In Jeremiah 18 and verse 4. If you notice Daniel 2, it says the iron, part potter's clay and part iron. The iron is, of course, Europe. What is the potter's clay? Jeremiah, the 18th chapter, verse 6, plainly shows us what is the potter's clay. It says, O house of Israel, cannot I do with you as this potter, says the Eternal? Behold, as the clay is in the potter's hand, so are ye in my hand, O house of Israel. So the house of Israel is the potter's clay. So Daniel 2, we see the house of Israel and the iron in an alliance together. And who is the house of Israel? Well, read our booklet, The United States and Britain in Prophecy, and I put the link up in the chat room if you want to take a look at it. We show you that the house of Israel, not the house of Judah, the Jews, the house of Israel is the United States, the British Commonwealth of Nations, and the peoples of northwestern Europe. Europe and the house of Israel are in an alliance together, and that is NATO. And when we get down to Daniel, the 11th chapter, verses 40 through 45, we show you in that book that these verses is the potter's clay phase. The King of the North, who heads NATO, who funds NATO. It was originally called the Washington Treaty, then became NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Who is the King of the North? the President of the United States. And we show you Daniel 11:40 through 43 was fulfilled in the Gulf War that took place in 1990. Then in Daniel, the 11th chapter, verse 44, it says, "But tidings out of the east and out of the north." We show you in that booklet that those two words, east and north, means Old Persia and Media. And of course, that area consists of today Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iran, and northern Iraq, where ISIS dwelt. And it says tidings or reports out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. 20 years ago, 2001, we were getting reports out of Afghanistan of jihad against the West from the Al-Qaeda network. And then what happened? The USS Cole, the bombing of the USS Cole, the London bombings. And then what happened? The Twin Towers fell. When that happened, then NATO implemented the Article 5 of their charter, where it says if you attack one of us, you attack us all. And that was the first time it was ever, it was the first time NATO ever did that. So the Article 5 of their charter, and then it says, "Therefore he," that's the King of the North, the President of the United States, and his allies, "shall go forth with great fury." Do we remember the fury of 9/11? Everyone was furious. All our allies were furious. Everybody was on the same page. And they gathered together, NATO and the United States, and went into Afghanistan. They went forth with great fury to destroy and to utterly make away or annihilate many. And that's exactly what they did in Afghanistan. They annihilated the Al-Qaeda network, the Taliban. So this war on terror was prophesied in the pages of the Bible. But then it says, "But he," that's the King of the North, the President of the United States, "shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas and in the glorious holy mountain." Now, why does he do that? Well, commentaries will tell you, if you keep it in its context, it's because of tidings out of the east and out of the north. These tidings out of the east and the north are going to trouble the President of the United States, and they are going to occupy Judah, the Holy Land. They're going to occupy Judah. And as I've been saying in other broadcasts, that Judah is going to be broken to the point that the United States and NATO are going to come in and occupy Israel. He shall plant the tabernacles of his palace, that's military bases, military occupation, between the seas, that's the Negev desert, and in the glorious holy mountain, that is Jerusalem. So that is yet to happen. It hasn't happened yet. It happened partially with the embassy being put in Jerusalem by the United States. One military bases in the Negev desert, but we haven't seen troop deployments in the nation of Israel yet. Judah has to be broken first. And it's because of tidings out of the east and out of the north. And we see the Jews, pretty much the Israeli nation, is pretty much at war with Iran. Now we're seeing the Taliban take over Afghanistan, and Iran wants to expand its power into Afghanistan to increase its power. And that is going to trouble the United States of America and the Jews. The Jews are already at war. And Iran knows to get to the United States, you go through Israel. Because, of course, they are staunch allies. They are close allies. The United States have spent multiple billions of dollars in that little nation called Israel. It's the only democracy in the United States. So they know to get to the United States, you got to get through Israel. And it says, Judah shall be broken. It is because of tidings out of the east and out of the north that will trouble the United States, and they will bring in military occupation between the seas and in the glorious holy mountain. So that's the next prophecy that is yet to happen. Now, I don't believe it's going to be Joe Biden. I don't believe it's going to be Joe Biden. Me personally. What God has in store, we could be surprised. Something might happen. There are calls for his resignation. Not to mention the Arizona audits are coming out, and more audits are being done in other states, showing that this election is pretty much a fraud. So we're going to have to wait and see. I just don't see Biden fulfilling this prophecy. The man is just too weak, and ever since he got in, the other nations of the world know that he's weak, including the terrorists, and this is why they've made their move the way they did in Afghanistan. They know Joe Biden is a weak leader. I don't believe it's going to be Joe Biden. I thought it was going to be Donald Trump. Now, Donald Trump could run in 2024 and win and fulfill this prophecy again. We're just going to have to wait and see. All we know right now for sure that it is the President of the United States who's going to fulfill this prophecy. And it says that when he plants military bases between the seas and in the glorious holy mountain, it says, yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. Now think of it. Now that we see the Taliban take over Afghanistan, and we see Iran get together with the Taliban, and they start troubling the United States by going to war with Judah to the point that Judah is broken, you think the United States is going to be embarrassed again by the Taliban? Oh no, absolutely not. They are going to go into Israel and help Judah gladly, because they're going to say, no way are we going to be embarrassed by the Taliban once again. There's no way that Iran is going to embarrass us the way the Taliban embarrassed us in Afghanistan. Absolutely not. They're going to go in there with guns blazing to help Judah after what happened with the Taliban happening right now. They've embarrassed the United States. The United States has been embarrassed all over the world. They got kicked in the shins by a bunch of 75,000 troops, Taliban people. They got embarrassed. And it reminds me of this prophecy in Deuteronomy, the 32nd chapter. Deuteronomy, the 32nd chapter. Let me just set myself up here. Deuteronomy 32, verse 21. Notice what God says here. And God here is talking about the nation, the people of Israel, in the latter days, as it plainly says here, that this song of Moses will take place in the latter days in Deuteronomy 31:24. This is an end-time prophecy. And it says this. This is when they are in decline. Notice, it says here, verse 15, but Jeshurun waxed fat and kicked. Thou art waxen fat, thou art grown thick, thou art covered with fatness. Then he forsook God, which made him, and lightly esteemed the rock of his salvation. So obviously this is when Israel forsakes God, and they are sinning in God's sight. Then notice what it says here in verse 21. It says, I will move them to jealousy with those who are not a people. I will provoke them to anger with a foolish nation. And that's exactly what has happened. The United States, people in the United States and all over the Western world, the Israelites of the Western world are angry. 20 years. 20 years. And $2 trillion. And the United States got embarrassed. They took over Afghanistan in 9 days. God says, I will provoke you to anger with a foolish people. And that's exactly what has happened here. And the United States is embarrassed. It's an embarrassment to them. And the other allies are angry at what happened. They got kicked in the shins by this tiny little nation, the big power of the United States. And you see many American commentators and the American people angry. Well, prophecy has just been fulfilled. Deuteronomy 32:21. God says, I will provoke you to anger by a foolish people, a foolish nation. And that's exactly what has happened. Now, again, with this anger, when it comes to the NATO allies, notice the prophecy here in Daniel, the 11th chapter, verse 45. Daniel 11:45, it says, when the NATO occupies Israel, and they're going to do it after what happened here, they're going to do it with guns blazing. They're not going to be embarrassed again by the Taliban. They're not going to be embarrassed again by Iran. No way. They're going to go in here full of zeal. And what I see here now, a lot of these prophecies are making even more sense of why they're occupying Israel, why they occupy in Isaiah the 19th chapter when they go into the Sinai desert and start occupying the Sinai desert. They go in with all this zeal because they're not going to be embarrassed again in the Middle East. That's why. Now let's get back to this prophecy. When he plants the tabernacles of his palace, it says he shall come to his end and none shall help him. This corresponds with Jeremiah the 30th chapter, verse 14. It says, all your allies, it should read, all your lovers rather, it should read allies, as the Moffat translation says. This is talking about Israel. It says, all your allies have forgotten you, they seek you not. It says he shall come to his end and none shall help him. The reverse of Article 5 of the NATO Charter happens, where it says you attack one of us, you attack us all. So if you attack one of the NATO allies, they all come together and defend one another. Now we see them abandoning the Article 5 of the Charter. It says here, all your allies have forgotten you, they seek you not. He shall come to his end, and none shall help him. The NATO allies are ticked off at the United States for what Joe Biden just did in the past month or so. They are mad. They are upset because, again, 20 years, $2 trillion, not to mention they were there for their own security. And now it's just one big mess. One big mess. And when you watch Joe Biden's speech tonight, he didn't take blame for any of it. Even though he's the one that made the decision, not to mention that he was vice president for 8 years with Barack Obama. So he has the most experience when it comes to this whole Afghan problem. And he's pretty much taken no responsibility whatsoever. He blamed everybody else. He blamed the Afghan government. He blamed the president of Afghanistan, the troops in Afghanistan, like the Afghani troops. He blamed Donald Trump, and he's innocent of all charges, Joe Biden. What happened there is pretty much all his fault. So we are moving closer and closer to the fulfillment of this prophecy in Daniel, the 11th chapter, verse 45. And now, with what happened, it's making more and more sense of them why they go into Israel, because it says Judah shall be wounded to the point where NATO is going to step in and occupy Judah. But now I see why they go in there with so much zeal, because there's no way that they're going to be embarrassed again in the Middle East. But when they do occupy Judah, it says he shall come to his end and none shall help him. The end of NATO, the end of the United States and Britain as world powers. And that will be the end of the potter's clay phase of Daniel 2. Then comes the iron mixed with miry clay. NATO will break apart. NATO will be no more. Then the beast will form, the iron mixed with miry clay. And it'll be a church-state government. And they will form the next empire and attack Judah, attack Jerusalem, attack European Israel, and any U.S. troops in the Middle East and British troops in the Middle East, attack them, put them into slavery and captivity. And then we see China in Ezekiel the 38th chapter. China will attack the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. They will attack from the north and take all these nations over and put them in slavery and captivity unless we repent. If we don't repent and return to Almighty God, then these prophecies will come to pass. Now, if you want to learn more about that, I put some of the links in the chat room. Hi, Tim. How are you? Some links in the chat room. Middle Eastern prophecy, I urge you to read. The United States and Britain in prophecy, I urge you to read. And there's also links in the YouTube player as well, in the description below, of Russian prophecy, China and prophecy. Read these booklets. Study it with your own Bible. We are heading closer and closer to the fulfillment of Daniel, the 11th chapter, verse 45, where it says, the king of the north, which is the president of the United States, will plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas and in the glorious holy mountain. That is the next prophecy to be fulfilled. And when that happens, NATO is going to break apart. And look at France. France is in chaos right now. And, hi, Bill. France is in chaos right now. They don't want vaccine passports. They hate Macron. Marine Le Pen most likely will win the next election, which I think is going to take place in April. And she wants to pull out of NATO. She wants to pull out of the EU. And when that happens, because France is the major contributor to those two alliances, when that happens, it's all going to unravel, folks. It's all going to come apart. So it says here, when we see the occupation of Israel, NATO is going to break apart. And it's also fulfilling the prophecy of Daniel, the 12th chapter, verse 7, where it says, and when he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, all these things shall be finished. The scattering of the power of the holy people. There's more division today than ever in our nations. There is division between left and right, male and female, political division, social division, you name it, there is division everywhere. Alberta, up here in Canada, wants to break away from the Confederation, from Canadian Confederation. We see the split between North and South in the United States, the red states versus the blue states. Just division everywhere. We see mass protests in France, Britain, Germany, over all these COVID restrictions. One second here. All these COVID restrictions. We are more divided than ever, and it's because of these leaders that we have in power, these socialist leaders, and this is what socialists do. They divide peoples and nations so they can come in and control everything. That's why they divide and conquer. So we are divided within and without. NATO is divided. The NATO allies are upset with what Joe Biden just did in Afghanistan, and the allies around the world are upset with the United States. It's getting harder and harder to trust the United States anymore. And Daniel, the 11th chapter, verse 45 shows that's the last. This is going to be the last time that NATO is going to come in there, come into Judah, occupy it. That's going to be the last time. But with all this mistrust and everyone upset with everyone, this alliance is just finished, and China knows it. China sees that NATO is more divided than ever. And Daniel, the 11th chapter, verse 45 shows that alliance will finally dissolve. All right, so don't forget to log on to our website, britishisrael.ca. Read our booklets. There's 2 links there in the chat room. There's other links in the description below. Read our booklets, Middle Eastern Prophecy, United States and Britain in Prophecy, and inform yourself of these biblical prophecies that are about to come to pass. What's happening? What's happening right now in Afghanistan is, of course, contributing to Bible prophecy, tidings out of the east and out of the north. That's old Persia, that's Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iran. It says, shall trouble him. We are troubled right now. What's happening in Afghanistan is troubling. What's happening in Afghanistan is troubling the NATO allies. We are troubled right now. And it's going to come to a point where we are going to have to go in and save Judah, because Judah is going to be broken. And it's because of these tidings out of the east and out of the north. And Judah is pretty much at war with Iran already. There's already been skirmishes between the two nations already. And now Iran is seeking to expand its power into Afghanistan to make them even more stronger so they can go against Israel and attack Israel. We're living in troublesome times, folks. As it says here, the king of the north is going to be troubled. We are troubled right now. What's happening in Afghanistan is troubling. We are seeing prophecy fulfilled right in front of our eyes. All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining me here on tonight's live stream. Please, again, go to our website, britishisrael.ca. Download those booklets. They're absolutely free of charge. And study them with your Bible. All right, thanks everybody for joining me here on tonight's live stream, and I'll see you here again real soon.